All right, here we go. Good morning, good evening. Haha. Let's see here. So what I wanted to start with today was just showing you how to get started in R and R Studio, right? And so I'm assuming that you haven't worked in R before, but if you have, then you can kind of sit back and relax for a little bit. Maybe some of it will be a little bit of a refresher, and so maybe that's a good thing. So I wish it would say, okay, so it is recording. Just always like to make sure that it's recording. So we introduced a data set just yesterday. And so I just want to show you how to enter it, and then just to get you started with kind of playing around with this data set, right? And so we were talking about the GDP in some countries between 2000 and 2004, right? So I'm stealing that from this blurb here, okay? So what I want to do is just kind of walk you through the layout of our studio, right? So you've already made a markdown file. So we're going to keep working with markdown, okay? But when you open our studio, when it's nice and fresh like this, and I should have done an update, but I'm assuming it still looks, like this. It hasn't changed for a long time, so I don't think it's going to change now. But usually when you open it, you'll have, and just to make sure you can see my pointer, okay, good. You'll have the R console. So notice how it says console up here, right? So you've got this R console over on the left. Okay, that's the brain, right? And that's where we do our computations, and that's our calculator. Okay, so the R console is the thing that's doing the work. So if you just want to, you can do stuff like, what if I want to take the mean of, good call. How can I make the font larger? Edit, maybe? Code? View, maybe? Zoom in, okay. Okay, good, thank you. Good call. I'm gonna try to zoom in even more. How's that? I'm checking. I'll do one more if I can. That should be okay. Here, I'm all embarrassed because I haven't done an update since 2019 on this computer. Oops. So if I want to take the mean of some numbers, right, and that's all I want to do with those numbers, then what I need to do is just enter them with commas to separate them, okay? So if I want to take the mean of 3, oops, it needs to catch up here, 3, maybe 14, maybe 5. It's all sluggish. I don't know. Right? And the spaces, so you can have spaces in here and it won't care. There are instances where you don't want to have spaces, right? Especially if you're naming stuff, it has to be one name. But you can have a space here, and then what we would do if we want to find the mean, so the average of 3, 14, and 5, then you just hit enter after this, okay? So this little caret, it's called a caret. It's that little, what is that? Greater than sign. I always have to do less than because it makes an L, right? If it's not less than, it's greater than, right? So this caret, it's a prompt, and that's where we would enter our code that we want to run. And it's telling us that the mean of these things is 3, right? So I can go back. If you use your up arrow, it'll insert the last thing that you said, right? And so you can go back, right? I guess I ran the library command, I ran all this, and then the last thing I wrote was this. So then I can go back and I can change it to 55, hit enter. Hey, that doesn't make sense. Oh, fine. What's it doing? What's the problem here? Didn't like how I entered the data. Here, I just tried to go in freewheeling and it did not pay off. Guess I have to wrap them up in a C. So this C here, right? We saw that in our notes. Sorry about that. I should have played around a little bit beforehand. But I thought, oh no, that's so easy. I don't need to look at that. Anyways, shame on me. So the C wraps it up and says that this is all the data to look at. When it was doing the mean of 3, it was just looking at the mean of 3, which is always going to be 3. So that's my bad. So what if we change this and just change it to 5? That makes more sense. I don't know why I was okay with the mean being 3. I think it's too early in the morning. That's why. That's my excuse. That doesn't make sense. Anyways, so yeah, usually we want to talk about, we want to do more than one thing with a data set, right? And so we want to do more than one thing with this array. It's an array or a vector. So what we would do is we could just run it like this, right? So that's C, and then 3, 14, and 5 is our data set. I want to kind of keep them together. If I name it something, then I can keep calling it that, right? And so if I give it a name like short, maybe shorty, that's cute. You can give it whatever name you want, right? And then I like to do a space sometimes. You don't have to do a space, but just to visualize it a little bit better, sometimes I'll do spaces around, but spaces don't matter, right? And so it'll just ignore spaces. So if we name shorty, and then I think if I enter, so I just copied and pasted that C, 13, 4, and 3, 14, and 5. Can't even talk, right? So then when I run it by hitting enter, right? So when I run it, all of a sudden, now notice how it came up with shorty over here, right? And it's telling me that shorty, cute, is a numerical variable, right? With 1 column and 3 observations. And the observations are 3, 14, and 5. Okay. And so it just tells us all the things, all the names that it knows. So this is really useful, this area over here, because then you can look back and say, oh yeah, I do have something called shorty that I can use. Okay. So now I can take the mean. Exactly. So yeah, let me go back there. So this arrow just says, okay, shorty is going to be assigned to this, right? And you can imagine if you have a huge data set, then that's going to be really useful, right? You can just say, oh yeah, the portion that I'm interested in is called, you could even call it A. There are some values that are reserved. I think you can't use a lowercase I think. So there are some that are not allowed, but it'll just tell you, it'll complain when you do something wrong. So for example, if you do the mean of shorty now, it gives us that same answer, right? So that's nice, especially if we're dealing with longer calculations like the standard deviation. Now, we haven't talked about the standard deviation, but I just want to show you how easy it is to find the standard deviation using software. The standard deviation is a measure of the spread, right? We talked about that. It's the measure of spread that we're going to use for normal distributions, right? And so the standard deviation is just SD and then of, and let's do shorty again, right? What's nice is that if you find, oh no, it was supposed to be 3, 14, and 15, right? What I can do is I can change shorty and I can just copy. I guess I could use the up arrow. Try using the up arrow. If you're playing along, then try using your up arrow to flip through, okay, until I get to shorty, which is the one that I'm like, I want to change it, right? So what if I want to change it to -5? That's fine. I can do negatives, right? And so now I'm going to run that again. So now when I hit enter, it should change the shorty over here, right? And it did to -5. So now I can use the up arrow again, because now if I want to run the mean of shorty, the mean is now 4. Okay. So it'll just remember the last shorty that we ran. Okay. What if I want to have two shorties? It's just funnier when you name it something funny. It's just a lot more entertaining. So what if I want to make this shorty 2? That's pretty typical. Usually I'll have my original data set, and then my second data set is blah, blah, blah 2, and then blah, blah, blah 3, and then blah, blah, blah 4, and they all serve different purposes. Okay, but what if I have shorty 2 is going to have that +5? Okay. So when I run it, right, it recognizes that shorty is different from shorty 2. Okay. And notice how it tells us, okay, these are numerical variables, both of them. Okay. So especially for categorical data, if it sees a number, it's going to treat it as a numerical variable. So if you're using a number as a category, then you would need to force that. But I'll bring that up again when it comes up, right? But for now, we're just dealing with numerical data, and that's kind of what it defaults to if you have numbers. So now you can do calculations on shorty 2, right? What if you do, so a really common mistake that I make, and you will make, is that what if I do the mean of, I do a typo, right? SHRTY, I drop the O, right? What's going to happen if I run this? There is no T, right? So the error that I get here is going to be the object is not found. Okay, so that's it telling you that, hey, I actually don't know what you mean by shorty, right? I only know shorty and shorty 2, right? And so don't be upset when you see these errors, right? A lot of the time, they're just going to help guide you along the way, right? This is just the computer, so it only knows what you've told it, right? And so if it's complaining, it's all our fault, unfortunately, right? But the more error codes that we see, the more, the quicker we'll be at saying, oh, whoops, I just had a typo. Whereas the first time when you see something like this, it's a little bit cryptic, right? It's hard to understand what it wants, right? Yeah, you should be happy when you see an error because it's just telling you what to do, right? No errors is more fun. Oh yeah, how did shorty times 2 go? What happens when you do? I gotta try it. Shorty times 2. How about that? It works. And what does it do? It takes each element and multiplies it by 2. How long will it remember the name shorty for? It'll remember it for as long as it's up here. Now, sorry, I've got a little bar here in the way. But what you can do, if you want it to forget, usually we want to remember. But if you want it to forget all the things that you've run already, right, then there's this little broom up here. So if you try hitting that little broom, it says clear objects from the workspace. So then it's going to clear them out and then they're all gone. On the other hand, you can save this, okay? And I'm going to save that, or I'm going to saving it for another day. But what it does is it creates the environment. So it recreates the environment that you were working in. So especially if you've run a huge file, so if you've worked in Maple, then you have to hit the double exclamation mark where you have to rerun it. Usually it's really quick to rerun it. And then I just usually rerun my file. You basically have to rerun everything if it's gone. But usually when I close RStudio, it'll say, do you want to save this? Is it going to be a workspace? I think they call it. And then you can save it and then you can open it and just start from where you left off, right? Or even sometimes, oh yeah, no, we don't need to do that. You'll see. Yeah, for Maple's a little bit tricky to deal with sometimes, right? You have to run each line, or there is the shortcut, the double exclamation mark just runs through the entire file, but it can take a long time. So shorty is a list of 3 integers, right? And so shorty, if you just want to have a look at shorty, you can't tell there. It's an array. We call that an array of 3 integers, 3, 14, and -5 in this case. So that's why it just takes each element and multiplies it by 2. Nice. Okay, fun guys. Oh yeah, what does the 1 mean? It means that it's the first column. Okay. Yeah, so the C where we generated shorty, the C concatenates and what concatenates means is it connects them as one string, but not as a list of all those numbers. It connects them as if it was a vector. If you guys are familiar with a vector, or just a column of data. Okay. So kind of getting back to the environment, the workspace, everything. When we've done all this work, once we've run it, it's kind of gone, right? We can access it using the up arrow, but usually what we want to do is we want to save this work so that we can go back and rerun it. Okay, so you've got a couple of options for doing that. You could start, so if you start a new R script, then it'll only handle R code. Okay, So what we're doing here is just plain R code. Often we'll want to have a write-up around that R code, right? And so then we'll use R Markdown. For today, let's just start an R script and just stick to R, okay? So what we want to do here is I want to save it something, call it something, right? Not just untitled one. Uh-oh, it's going to take forever. Maybe. Let's see here. How can I? Okay. Where do I want to name it? Stat 230. And here it's going to be really important that there are no spaces. You can use underscores, or I prefer the camel type, right? Stat 230. I don't know, September 17th, whatever. And I'll save it on my desktop. So now I've got this .r file. Okay. Hey, good morning. So, we did all that work, right? And I don't want to be going through all my code again. So notice where we were working is now down at the bottom, the lower left-hand quadrant, right? I don't want to be copying all this. So what I can do instead is you can go up to the top right and look at your history. And notice, I have to move all these things out of the way here, but notice that now I can, well, these were my mistakes, so I'm going to ignore those, but, and let me see if I can, there. Make this a little bit larger here. See how there's this to source, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try, and what I did, just in case I went too fast here, is I clicked on this one and then I held Shift, just like you normally would, to select everything in between, and then I clicked that last shorty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to move it to source. Now that should put it over here. I haven't played around with this recently, so here we go. It worked. Right, and so here, now what I'm able to do is I'm able to save this R code. So notice it's red because it's not been saved. So I'm going to hit save. And now I can open up this script. And when I'm working in this file here, if I want to run this line, what I do is there are a couple of ways I could do it. I could highlight it. Okay, and I think it's changed a little bit here. You could have it on a line and then hit this run the current line or selection. Okay, then it takes the mean of those values, right? And so then it bumps this line of code, that top line where my cursor was, it bumps it down to the bottom and then it runs it, right? But now I have it saved here so I can go back and rerun it, okay? Or if I wanted to rerun everything, I would just highlight everything. So this is where we were talking about Maple, right? Maple, you would have to go through and hit every line, and that's insane. It takes forever. Or the double exclamation mark. But here, if I want to run all this, and it has to be, it's going to run it in order, right? It's just a computer. It's just going to do what you tell it to do, right? And so now if I highlight this and I hit run the current selection, it goes so fast, but it did it all, right? And so here, right, we've got the mean, the mean, the mean. And then same complaint that we saw before, right? And so it's got everything and it just reran everything. And I think it was super fast. So another way, notice when you hover over, hover over this, right? I'm on a Mac, so it is saying you could just hit Command Enter, right? So usually when I'm working, I just end up hitting Command Enter. So as long as your cursor is on that line, so let's say I want to do the standard deviation of shorty. If I hit Command, or of course, if you're on a PC, it would be Control, right? So Command or Control Enter, and then it would run that line where the cursor is. Notice that the cursor got bumped down to the next line, right? Just in case I want to run that next line as well, which I'm going to do, Command or Control Enter, and then it just goes to the next line, right? And so you could pretty quickly work through a bunch of code that way, or highlight it all and then just hit this button. I think you can even use the shortcut, even if you've highlighted. So let's say I want to run these two again, right? If I just highlight them, Command or Control Enter, and it just does both in order, right? Okay, so there's a couple of different tabs up here. The history tab I find kind of useful if I have to go back and remember what I did, right? And so, but usually I'm here in the environment tab. I don't know what connections is. I guess I don't have any connections. I think if I want to connect it to like SQL or something, but I'm not entirely sure. So I don't know, I've never used it. I'm usually here in the environment tab. So good. What if I do this? So what if I sweep it and it's going to clear everything that it knows, right? Are you sure you want to remove these objects? The operation cannot be undone. Uh-oh. Yes. So notice that now it doesn't know what shorty is anymore, right? So if I try to do something like the median, which we haven't talked about, I mentioned last day, right? Or maybe let's stick to the mean, but the median is just the central value. If you sort it and it's the center value, but let's do the mean of shorty one more time. Okay. It's pretending to still remember them, right? And you can select them here. But when I run this, so I just use the shortcut Command or Control Enter, right? Again, it gives us that object not found. And usually if you get an error code that you are not sure what it means, right, then I just Google it, right? So I would probably just Google this, right? Object not found, throw it in, and lots of people have already asked, lots of people have already answered. The answers can get pretty catty, so don't be upset if you read a rude comment. This is so easy. I don't know why you're asking this question. Well, it's not helpful, is it? But anyways, so just if you get an error code and you're not sure what it is prompting you to do, then Google it, right? And play around with it. Okay, so good. Well, that was a lot. How about instead of plugging in the GDP data that we were looking at last day, instead of just putting it in the console directly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in my R code file, because remember, you've saved it probably, and you can pull it up again, right? Which means that you don't have to type it all up again. You can just go in and run it and work from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this GDP, just like in the notes. So I have it over here. Let's see here. So the GDP, and it's going to be this. I wonder if I can copy. Hopefully I can, because that was the whole idea with having the R code in here, is so that you can just copy it over. And I guess I don't need to type it out here. Looks pretty good, pretty safe. Okay. What if I run it? So notice that it doesn't know what GDP is yet, right? Not until I run it. So that can be confusing in the beginning, is because, well, I told it what GDP was here in my file, right? But we haven't told the brain what GDP is. So you've got two options. You could also copy and paste it down here like that, right? Or I'm going to undo that. You'll want to have your shortcut for undo, right? Control Z, Command Z, undo, 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 undo. That's going to come up for sure. For sure. So having those shortcuts is really useful. But what I'm going to do here is, instead of running it directly here in the console, right? So here, this is the console, so that's what I'll be calling it. So instead of running it directly in the console, I'm going to run it from my script, my R script, we call it. Okay. And so as long as your cursor is somewhere on the line that you want to run, you can use that shortcut, or you can use the run the current line or selection. Doesn't matter, but either way, it'll put it down here, right? So notice when I hit enter, it'll bring it down here, run it, and have the GDP available for us to use. Okay. Usually, if you've done any sort of programming, you're used to making comments. So making comments is where you're not writing R code, right? But you're writing reminders to yourself, right? Oh, this is what I was doing here, right? And you, yeah, hashtag something, right? And so in R, what we use is we use the number sign. Notice how it turns green. And you can have a space there or not, it doesn't matter. But here, here we will start the GDP analysis. Okay. So it's all in green, right? And that's just saying that, okay, that's not our code. That's just code to myself to help me remember what was happening. I can even do stuff like, what if I wanted to just have another GDP, right? Maybe call it GDP2, where, I don't know, there's another data point here. Let's add one, just make one up. 19.4. Probably doesn't make sense. That's okay, right? I'm just adding 19.4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a comment, right? Creating, oops, creating another data set with 19.4. Something to help you remember what you were doing there, right? Because what happens is you're so immersed, right? You're working so hard on a file that it feels like, oh, you'll never forget what you were doing here. And then you put it away for a week, and then you open it up and it's just gibberish. You've made a complete mess for yourself. So unless you're kind of talking to your future self here, it's going to get really messy. And that's just going to come with practice, right? You're going to find yourself wanting to make comments just to kind of help yourself out later. What was the thinking here, right? So many times I've opened up a file and not understood what I myself wrote. Well, that happens. So anyways, so you'll want to write comments, but that's going to come with practice, right? The more you do and the more kind of facepalm moments that you have, the better you will get, right? So here I'm creating this GDP2. So if I run that, right now I have GDP2. Notice that it tells me again that these are numerical variables. One column, GDP has 12 observations, right? GDP2 has 13 observations, and then it lists them if you wanted to go into more detail, but it kind of trails off here, right? Okay, so what if I change my mind, right? What if I don't want to have GDP2? Maybe there's, maybe it's generating an error that I don't know how to fix yet, right? Then what I can do is I can just comment out this code. Oh, didn't like that. I can just put a hashtag in front. Sorry, I know it's a pound, but hashtag's just more fun to say, right? And so I can throw a pound sign in front, and then it's all greened out. And even if I do run this line, right, it just doesn't understand it because it's not our code, right? So error, unexpected symbol in creating another, right? And it's just like, I don't know what to do here, right? There's nothing for me to do. Okay? So you can use comments to actually make comments, or to kind of have code that you like, but maybe it's not quite finished yet. Then you can comment it until it's working. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you want to import a data set, do you? You think you're ready? I think you're ready too. So usually the easiest way to import a data set is as a CSV file. So typically you'd want to save an Excel file as a CSV. Now a CSV is just a comma separated values is what it stands for. And it's just the easiest way for R to read code. Let's do, I don't have a CSV file to practice with, and importing an Excel document, a proper Excel document, we can do it. The problem is, because if you know an Excel file, right, you know that we can have multiple worksheets. And so that's hard for R to understand, right, and to kind of put into this flat environment. So it's a little bit more complicated with pure Excel spreadsheets. You can do it, you can Google it, right? But you might need a package, okay? And so for now, for today, because 50 minutes just flies by, I guess. And I say that every 50-minute class, I know, but it just, it's crazy. But how about we find a fun data set that we can use? So I think there are a lot of data sets that are already built into R. My favorite one is Chickweight, okay? And so I'm pretty sure it's spelled Chickweight like this. So what's nice about R is it likes to help you along, right? As soon as you start typing, it's going to start to predict, hey, do you mean this thing that I know already, right? Do you mean this thing that I already know? Okay. So the Chickweight data is really cute. And so the Chickweight data frame, now we're talking about a data frame, has 578 rows, which means we have 578 observations and 4 columns, right? 4 columns for an experiment on the effect of diet on early growth of chicks. So, and then there's this one, and I think it's the same data set. But here, let's just run Chickweight. So if you just run it, it tries to enter or show you as much of the data as possible, right? But here's the data, blah, 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 blah. It's huge. And we've got 4 variables, right? Weight, time, chick, diet. What's one problem that we have? So it knows what chick weight is, but usually I like to have the whatever data that I'm working with somewhere up here, right? So what I'm going to do is instead of just calling chick weight, I'm going to name it something. And usually I'll call it chick, just because it's a little bit quicker to type than chick weight, right? With that camel type. So now what I'm going to do, instead of calling it chick weight all the time, which you can do, okay, I'm going to call it just chick. Okay, and that's going to be the name of my data set. Okay, it's going to look a little bit different than GDP. So now if I take chick and run it, hey, it didn't like my cursor there. Now I've got this fancy data frame, it's called, because it has more than one column. Okay. If you want to bring in a CSV file, now I don't have, all my CSV files are grades. I can't show you guys grades. So I am a little bit stumped here. What should I bring in? I'll have to be more prepared with a CSV file. But what if I just want to call it, so notice how data is kind of reserved, right? So I'll call it data 2. And I'm just going to make up a fake import. Okay, so data 2 is going to be, what is it? Read.csv. Okay. And then it kind of helps us along, right? Especially if you've worked in Excel, right? Excel also helps you with, yeah, no. No. So now, so it kind of helps you along, right? With what it needs. So it needs to know, hey, it keeps gapping out here. It needs to know the name of the file. Now, usually it has to be in quotes. So typically something like this would be, and I'm pretty sure it would be like grades.csv, just generically, right? Maybe that's the name of my file. And then I could just hit enter because all the other things have defaults, right? So header equals true is just telling it that, yes, the first row is a header. So that's not data, right? Those are variable names, and that's pretty typical. And so that's why it's the default. If you don't have that, that's weird, but also then you would have to change it to header equals false, right? But usually we have a header. The next thing it's highlighting is the Sept. So the separation is a comma, because remember, a CSV file is a comma separated values, right? And so the default is commas, right? And so whenever it sees a comma, it's going to separate the values, right? And then the rest is just garbage. And if I try to run this, it's not going to work because one, grades.csv does not exist. I just made it up. But also, I have to make sure that this R file, okay, I saved that on my desktop. Usually my most current stuff, I always just have working off of my desktop, right? That's just how I work, right? You might have different file structures, but so my R file is saved on my desktop. The CSV file that I'm trying to get to has to be in the same space. So what we call is, that's called the working directory, okay? And that's a little bit too much for today, but how about for next time that we're working in R, I'll have a practice CSV file that we can bring in, okay? because maybe I think that'll be fun. But yeah, so the easiest way is to use the read.csv. So you save your data as a CSV file, which is pretty typical, right? If you go to Stats Canada and download data, it downloads as a CSV file. So then you can just upload it into R and use it. So you can play around with that. Okay. I'm going to comment this because it doesn't exist, right? So I don't want it confused by what I said there. Okay. Just like that, I ate up the whole time. So now, as we work through the rest of these notes here, right, on the that we were working through last day, right, we started and we talked about the mean of GDP, right? So as we talk about these concepts, right, I want you to try to play around with these commands that I give you at the end, just to make sure that you know kind of how to run it. Yeah, you can always navigate. So if you change, I think you can change the directory here, right? That can get tricky, right? So you might have something like documents. Is it / or /? On a PC, it's definitely / I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to cheat. If you go to session, tools. Session, I was right, but then I was wrong. Set working directory, and then you can choose your directory, or you can just set it to source file location. So usually what I do is, oh yeah, so it's the / on Windows / on a Mac, I'm pretty sure, but let's see here. So if I go set working directory to source file location, then it just says here. So when I do that, I steal it because it says, hey, this is the code that I ran to do that. So then I steal it and I put it up here. Copy, paste. And I just save whatever it told me it did, right? So set the working directory, set WD working directory to the desktop, right? And then grades would have to be in the desktop. Here, I could change it to documents if I have the grades.csv in a document. It's nice to have all your files in one location though, because otherwise you're running all over the place. All right. Okay, I'm so out of time, but I think that was really fun. Get to play around a little bit here. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see here. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we meet on Tuesday, right? I want to say Monday because it's Friday, Monday, usually. See you on Tuesday. And I guess I'll stop this recording. Haha.